My brother had not seen me in almost a decade when he pulled up to the gates of my oceanfront mansion. His car looked tired, the kind that carried more years than miles, while I stood on the balcony above, coffee in hand, the waves crashing behind me. The irony wasn't lost on me. 9 years ago, he had cut me off from the family, called me trash, and told me I would never amount to anything. And now, here he was, parking in the driveway of a house he once said I would never own, not even in my wildest dreams. That moment, him hesitating at the doorbell, me smiling from the glass window, wasn't about revenge. It was about realization. The story of how far I had come wasn't just mine. It was a story about resilience, about how being underestimated can sometimes be the best motivation. But don't mistake me for the guy who had it all figured out. For most of my life, I was the opposite of impressive. If there was a wrong turn, I took it. If there was an unlucky break, it found me. My brother Daniel was the polished one, straight A student, college-bound, the family's golden ticket. I was the leftover, the one everyone politely avoided discussing at reunions. When Daniel cut me off, it stung, but it also sparked something inside me. And that spark grew into the fire that would eventually build businesses, change lives, and lead me to a moment no one could have predicted. Standing in front of my own oceanfront home with the same brother, who once called me worthless, waiting for me to answer the door. Now, before you imagine this as some overnight success story with fancy cars and easy wins, let me be clear. It wasn't. It was messy. It was humiliating. It was full of rejection, betrayal, and late nights where I questioned if any of it was worth it. But here's the thing. Every setback became a stepping stone, and the reason that moment at the mansion meant so much wasn't the house or the money. It was the journey. The 9 years of silence. The 9 years of grinding in the shadows. The 9 years of being trash in his eyes while secretly rewriting the script of my life. So how does someone go from being cast aside by his own brother to becoming a CEO with an empire by the ocean? Let's rewind. Back before the mansion. Back before the insults. Back to the kid no one believed in. Welcome, story lovers. From where are you watching? Drop your city name in the comments so we can see how far our story travels. I wasn't born into wealth, privilege, or even stability. I was born into a family where every dollar stretched thinner than patience, where every dream had to be practical, and where love was unevenly distributed. My brother Daniel was the one everyone pinned their hopes on. Teachers admired him, relatives bragged about him, and our parents quietly saved whatever scraps they could for his tuition. Me, I was the second son, the one people politely smiled at but rarely invested in. It's not that I didn't have ambition. I had dreams, big ones. As a teenager, I wanted to study architecture. I loved the idea of designing buildings, of creating spaces that outlived their makers. I'd fill notebooks with sketches of skylines, beach houses, and bridges, imagining one day I'd bring them to life. But life, as it often does, had other plans. When Daniel graduated high school with honors and a scholarship in his hand, I was working part-time at a grocery store, bagging items for neighbors who barely looked me in the eye. I told myself it was temporary, that my chance would come. But chances require resources, money, time, guidance, and I had none. My father's health began to decline around that time. Long hours in a factory had broken down his body, and medical bills started to pile up like bricks on my back. Daniel, away at college, sent money when he could, but the day-to-day burden was mine. I drove Dad to endless appointments, sat in waiting rooms while nurses whispered about costs, and tried to hide the overdue notices from piling on the kitchen counter. At 19, I made my first real sacrifice. I gave up any idea of college. I couldn't leave my mother to manage Dad's illness alone. I told myself I'd apply later, when things stabilized. But later never came. Instead, I worked. First at a warehouse, then as a delivery driver, then at a diner on the night shift. I rotated through jobs like cards in a deck, none of them glamorous, all of them necessary, and each time I swallowed a little more of my pride. Dreams of architecture faded into the background, replaced by survival math. Rent, bills, medicine. The real breaking point came when Dad's condition worsened. I remember one night vividly, sitting in a freezing hospital hallway, the vending machine humming behind me, counting out wrinkled dollar bills to see if I could afford his prescription. I was short by $7. The nurse looked at me with pity, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly invisible, like I was playing a game I was never meant to win. When Dad passed, something shifted in our family. Grief has a way of exposing cracks. My brother stayed long enough for the funeral, dressed sharply, shaking hands like it was another business event. Me? I was the one who handled the paperwork, canceled the utilities, comforted our mother as best I could. Daniel left with his world intact. Mine felt like it had collapsed. But life didn't pause for mourning. Bills still came, jobs still demanded. So I kept working, and the years rolled on. My 20s became a blur of uniforms, warehouse gloves, diner aprons, delivery vests. My friends moved into careers, families, mortgages. I moved into different break rooms, eating sandwiches out of plastic bags and convincing myself that one day I'd figure it out. And yet, even in that grind, there were small acts of survival that felt like victories. I learned how to stretch $20 into a week's worth of meals. I learned to fix my car with YouTube tutorials instead of mechanics. I learned how to live without expecting anyone to save me. Still, there was always that quiet ache. Those dreams I had, shelved away. At night, when shifts ended and silence filled my apartment, I'd take out my old sketchbooks and flip through them. I'd trace the lines of buildings I once wanted to design, reminding myself that I wasn't just a laborer, that somewhere, inside, there was still a boy who dreamed bigger. But dreams without opportunity can feel like torment. And the cruelest part? My own brother, once my closest friend, had begun to see me not just as struggling, but as embarrassing. At family gatherings, he'd introduce himself proudly, then look away when someone asked about me. He wore his success like armor. I wore my survival like shame. The final fracture came in the form of words I'll never forget. One Thanksgiving, after I had worked a double shift just to afford a tiny contribution to dinner, he cornered me in the kitchen. With cold certainty, he said, "You're trash. You'll never be anything more." It stung because it came from him, the person I had once admired, the brother I would have defended through anything. That night, I drove home in silence, replaying his words again and again: trash, worthless, invisible. But here's the irony. Sometimes being discarded is what forces you to build something new. Sometimes being written off is the only permission you need to rewrite your story. At that point, I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I knew one thing. My life couldn't end as the brother who failed. There had to be more. And if no one believed in me, I would have to believe in myself enough for everyone. That was the foundation of what came next. Not opportunity, not privilege, just pain, anger, and a stubborn refusal to accept that trash was all I'd ever be. And so the real journey began. The thing about hitting rock bottom is that you start looking at the tiniest cracks of light as possible doorways. For me, that crack appeared in the unlikeliest of places, a warehouse office. It was a Tuesday night, another 12-hour shift, of loading pallets when I stumbled into the manager's office to drop off paperwork. His desk was a clutter of invoices, shipping manifests, and an open laptop glowing in the dim light. I wasn't supposed to be in there for more than 2 minutes. But curiosity is dangerous when you've spent your life ignored. On the screen, I noticed something odd, a spreadsheet with client ad budgets. But instead of product lists or shipment notes, there were columns about impressions, clicks, and conversion rates. I didn't understand it fully then, but it was about advertising, digital advertising, numbers flowing like a secret language. The manager apparently had been moonlighting, running side hustles through the company's contacts. I should have walked away. But that night, something in me refused. I scribbled down a few terms, words like CPC and ROI, and took them home. Later, sitting in my tiny apartment, I typed them into Google. And suddenly, a whole new world opened in front of me. Digital marketing, social media campaigns, the science of turning clicks into dollars. For weeks, I became obsessed. Every free hour I had, I devoured articles, YouTube tutorials, online forums. I signed up for free trials of software, experimented with fake accounts, and built tiny campaigns just to see what happened. It was confusing, exhilarating, and strangely addictive. But discovery didn't mean opportunity, not yet. Opportunity came disguised as insult. One Friday, the manager called me into his office. "You're wasting your potential here," he said, smirking. "Not because you're better than this, but because you'll never rise above grunt work. People like you stay stuck." He didn't know it, but those words lit a fuse. I left the office angry, but also determined. If he could build a side hustle from scraps, why couldn't I? That was the beginning of my first business attempt. I offered to manage Facebook pages for local shops, cafes, barbers, mom and pop, stores. I charged pennies, sometimes just free meals in exchange for running their pages. My designs were amateurish, my captions clumsy, but I was learning, and slowly, results started showing. More foot traffic, more calls, more buzz. One cafe owner, a woman named Marlene, pulled me aside one day. "You're on to something, kid," she said. "Don't quit. You have a gift." Her words were like oxygen to a drowning man. Nobody had ever told me I had a gift. I clung to that sentence as if my life depended on it. But with growth came enemies. At the warehouse, co-workers noticed me juggling my phone, answering client emails during breaks. Rumors spread that I thought I was better, that I was playing businessman. One rival in particular, a shift supervisor named Carl, mocked me openly. "Look at CEO over here," he'd laugh, while others chuckled. Yet even ridicule fueled me. Every laugh became proof that I was on the right path. The turning point arrived when Marlene introduced me to her cousin, who owned a small chain of restaurants. He needed marketing help, and unlike my other clients, he was willing to pay real money. The proposal terrified me. I had never handled budgets that size. What if I failed? What if I wasted his money and proved everyone right? It was an ethical dilemma, too. I could play it safe, stick with tiny gigs, or I could leap and risk everything. After nights of sleepless debate, I chose the leap. The first campaign nearly killed me with stress. I triple-checked every ad, every line of copy, every budget setting. I stayed awake until dawn, refreshing dashboards, terrified of mistakes. But then, results came. His restaurant saw a spike in reservations, online orders doubled, and suddenly my phone wouldn't stop ringing. That one client turned into 3, then 5. Within a year, I wasn't just freelancing, I was building an agency. But success came with new problems. My brother Daniel caught wind of it. Not from me, I hadn't spoken to him since the Thanksgiving fallout, but through relatives. At first, he dismissed it as small-time hustling. But when he realized I had quit the warehouse and was making more than he did at his corporate job, his silence turned icy. And here's where the conflict sharpened. I wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. I was fighting for identity. My whole life, I had been the lesser brother. Now, I was becoming something else. And that threatened the balance of power Daniel had always held over me. Then came the betrayal that nearly ended everything. One of my new clients, a gym chain, was run by an old acquaintance of Daniel's. Somehow, my brother got to him, whispering doubts about me, calling me unstable, unprofessional, desperate. I lost the account overnight. Thousands of dollars gone, employees I could no longer pay, momentum shattered. For a week, I spiraled. I sat in my apartment surrounded by overdue bills, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Daniel had been right all along. Maybe I was trash. Maybe I had flown too close to the sun. But then, something shifted again. I remembered Marlene's words, "You have a gift." And I realized one betrayal couldn't erase what I had built. I doubled down. I went after clients harder, pitched with more passion, offered more value, and slowly, the tide turned back in my favor. New contracts replaced old ones. Revenue returned. The agency survived. The stakes were higher now, not just money, but dignity. Not just survival, but legacy. I wasn't chasing wealth anymore. I was chasing redemption. What started with a scribbled note from a warehouse desk had grown into the foundation of a new life. A life Daniel didn't believe in. A life no one saw coming. And yet the real test, the breaking point, was still ahead. The air in the boardroom was thick with arrogance, the kind that only people with too much money and too little conscience could carry. Leather chairs creaked as executives leaned back, sipping mineral water that cost more than Ruth earned in an entire day. They didn't see her as a person. To them, she was just the background noise, the janitor who entered after hours mopping floors and emptying trash cans, invisible, insignificant. But that invisibility was about to end. Ruth stood in the doorway, her mop still damp from the hallway she'd been cleaning. The CFO, a man with silver hair and a sharp tongue, narrowed his eyes at her. "Excuse me, this is a closed meeting," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. The room chuckled, a few executives exchanging knowing smirks. They thought it was amusing, a janitor interrupting their sacred space. But Ruth didn't flinch. She took a step forward, her voice calm but carrying a weight none of them could laugh off. "You might want to open it." Gasps broke out. A secretary shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to call security or stay frozen. The CEO leaned back, arrogance dripping from every movement. "And why," he said slowly, "would we want to do that?" Ruth walked toward the table, her footsteps echoing in the silence. From her pocket, she pulled out a folded napkin, crumpled, stained, but alive with truth. She placed it on the polished mahogany table like a queen laying down her winning card. "This," she said, her eyes scanning the room, "is your missing $4.2 million. The laughter stopped. The CFO blinked, confused. What is this?" Numbers. Columns. Calculations scribbled in pen. They weren't neat, but they were precise. Ruth's handwriting, carried over from nights spent studying accounting. Textbooks on a broken phone screen while her son slept. "I know these numbers because I studied them. I know your audit reports because I used to dream of writing them. And I know fraud when I see it," she said firmly. The CEO tried to regain control. "This is absurd. Security—" But Ruth cut him off. Her voice rose, sharp, clear, commanding. "Before you call anyone, you should know I've already sent copies to the IRS, to the SEC, and to Channel 7's investigative desk." The room froze. The words hung heavy in the air like thunder before a storm. One executive dropped his pen. Another muttered something under his breath. The CFO's face drained of color, sweat glistening on his temple. For the first time in years, Ruth felt the balance of power shift. The people who had looked down on her, laughed at her, ignored her existence, were now staring at her in fear. "Who do you think you are?" the CEO barked, his voice cracking, under pressure. Ruth leaned forward, her tone calm but lethal. "I'm the woman you didn't see. The one you mocked when she cleaned your coffee stains. The one you underestimated. And today, I'm the woman who ended your little empire. Silence. Pure, suffocating silence. The CFO lunged toward the napkin, but Ruth pulled it back. Too late. The truth is already out. Consider this. A courtesy. Warning. And then, without waiting for permission, she turned. Her shoes clicked against the marble floor as she walked toward the door. Heads followed her, but no one spoke. No one dared. Just before she left, she paused. Looked back at the plaque on the wall, the one engraved with the CEO's name shining under the fluorescent lights. She smiled faintly, almost to herself. "You'll want to take that down soon," she said softly. "Lies don't deserve plaques." The door closed behind her with a final, echoing thud. In that moment, Ruth wasn't a janitor anymore. She wasn't. The forgotten student, the abandoned wife, the struggling mother. She was power. She was truth. She was everything they never believed she could be. And that was the day the woman with the mop became the most powerful person in the room. Dear audience, if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to give it a like. It really helps push it out to more story lovers just like you. The boardroom showdown changed everything, but not in the way most people expected. Ruth didn't walk out of that room with a corner office or a fancy title. She walked out with something far more valuable, her dignity intact, her truth spoken, and the power of choice resting firmly in her hands. The company's executives scrambled to save face after the exposure. Headlines exploded. Fraud at Fortune 500, firm uncovered by janitor. Reporters camped outside the building. Employees whispered in hallways, and Ruth's once invisible presence became the very heartbeat of the story. They offered her promotions, money, even a public apology. But Ruth, she simply smiled. She knew better than to exchange one cage for another. Instead, she made a quiet decision: to build a life on her own terms. With the whistleblower settlement, Ruth rented a small office space in a downtown building. Nothing glamorous, just 2 rooms, a desk and a second-hand laptop. On the door, she taped a simple piece of paper with bold letters: Carter Consulting, Forensic Accounting and Fraud Detection. It wasn't just a business, it was a declaration. Ruth wasn't here to play catch-up with the same corporate world that once looked down on her. She was here to change the rules entirely. At first, clients came slowly. Small nonprofits, struggling startups, people who couldn't afford big accounting firms but needed someone sharp to keep them safe. Ruth gave them more than just numbers. She gave them protection, dignity, and trust, and word spread. Soon, her name reached the ears of larger corporations, the very types of firms that once ignored her resume. Except now, they weren't interviewing her. They were hiring her, on her terms, at her rates. Her personal life shifted too. Her son, once the little boy who watched his mother juggle bills late into the night, was thriving, top of his class, curious, ambitious. And every time he walked into her modest office, seeing her name on the door, his chest swelled with pride. "Mom," he said once, running his fingers across the glass plaque she'd finally had made, "you built this from nothing." Ruth smiled. Not from nothing. From sacrifice. From hope. And he believed her because he'd lived it with her. The late nights, the skipped meals, the tears she thought he never saw. But Ruth didn't stop there. She remembered the years when opportunity felt like a locked door, guarded by people who never believed in her. She remembered the sting of cleaning offices while holding a degree no one cared about. So she started something new, a training program for low-income women. Free weekend classes where she taught them basic accounting, digital literacy, and how to recognize financial fraud. She partnered with community centers, churches, even shelters. At first, it was just a handful of women in folding chairs listening to Ruth scribble numbers on a whiteboard. But soon, those chairs filled faster than she could set them up. Dozens of women came, mothers, widows, immigrants, all eager to learn. and Ruth gave them what she once wished someone had given her: knowledge, confidence, and a path forward. Some of her students went on to land stable jobs. Others launched small bookkeeping businesses. A few even became part of Ruth's own consulting team. Years passed, and Ruth's world transformed in quiet but powerful ways. Her office expanded into a suite. Her name appeared in industry magazines. She was invited to speak at conferences, where she once would have been overlooked as just another face in the crowd. But if you asked Ruth what success meant, she wouldn't point to the clients or the money. She'd point to the evenings when she closed her laptop, made dinner with her son, and laughed in the kitchen. She'd point to the women in her classes who walked in timid but walked out strong. She would tell you that success wasn't about being the richest in the room. It was about never being invisible again. And yet, Ruth never lost her sense of irony. One year, she received an invitation to speak at a corporate ethics summit, hosted by none other than the very company she once exposed. She laughed when she saw the envelope, shaking her head at the irony of it all, but she accepted. On stage, under the bright lights, Ruth looked out at the sea of executives, auditors, and managers. Some of them whispered, recognizing her face. Others sat stiffly, embarrassed by the memory of what had happened, and Ruth told her story, not with bitterness, not with anger, but with clarity. She spoke about resilience, about truth, about the cost of silence. When she finished, the applause thundered across the hall. Not because she was flawless, but because she was real. Ruth Carter, the janitor, the whistleblower, the consultant, was no longer just a name in a headline. She had become a symbol. A reminder that power doesn't always wear a tailored suit. Sometimes it carries a mop, keeps its head down, and waits for the right moment to rise. And rise she did. So now, when Ruth walks into a boardroom, no one dares to underestimate her. She doesn't need to demand respect. It follows her naturally. The woman who once cleaned offices now cleans corruption. The mother who once counted pennies now counts victories. And the dreamer who once felt forgotten is now unforgettable. And that's the story of Ruth Carter's redemption. A story of resilience, sacrifice, and triumph against the odds. She didn't just change her life, she built a legacy. Thank you for watching, story lovers. If Ruth's journey inspired you, give this video a like, share it with someone who needs hope, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories every day. They once called Ruth just a cleaner, but here's the truth. She had been cleaning up other people's messes her whole life. Not just spilled coffee or dust in forgotten corners, but financial lies, emotional betrayals, and broken promises that others left behind. She didn't fight for applause. She didn't fight for fame. She fought for something far more precious, her dignity. And in doing so, she uncovered a simple but powerful truth. Strength isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about standing steady when the world expects you to bow. Her legacy didn't end in that boardroom. Years later, women who once scrubbed offices beside her now run small businesses of their own. Because Ruth mentored them, trained them, and gave them the push no one else would. Her son, the boy she once stretched $20 bills for, grew into a man who now teaches financial literacy to underprivileged kids. He says, "My mother saved lives with a calculator and courage." And that's the twist no one saw coming. Her quiet rebellion didn't just change her own destiny. It built a ladder for others to climb. So the next time you pass someone invisible, a janitor, a cashier, a woman juggling 2 jobs, remember Ruth. Because sometimes the people society overlooks are the very ones holding it together. The mop never defined her. Her dreams did. And the way she rose from the dust proved one thing. Even in silence, resilience speaks louder than power. Because sometimes the quietest woman in the room is the one who saves it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories and new videos.